Have you ever noticed when something's wrong, but no one else seems to notice? When routine becomes a silent maze and you're the only one listening to the echoes? I work as a night clerk at a forgotten motel on Route 66, practically in the middle of nowhere. You know that kind of building that seems frozen in time, with threadbare carpet, flickering neon lights, and the musty smell permeating the walls? Yeah. I sit there every night alone, watching the cars arrive and checking in guests. But there's one thing that's been keeping me up at night, and that might make you think twice about sleeping in one of those roadside motels. They enter. I see them. Businessmen, travel-weary families, couples arguing quietly in the lobby. I hand over the key, point the way to the room, and say goodnight. But after that, nothing. No return, no extra requests, no sound from the rooms. Not even the click of the doorknob in the morning. And the strangest thing? None of them ever stops by the front desk to check out. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. I'm not exaggerating. When I started this job, I thought it was just another rundown Route 66 place, surviving on the backs of truckers and lost travelers. But over time, I realized something wasn't right about the place. Guest records were piling up, with no discharges. The system said room 7 had been occupied since February, but that was last year. Room 3, a couple checked in on a rainy Friday, and their car has been in the parking lot ever since. But the room is locked from the inside, and that's not all. I started finding things, small objects, forgotten or abandoned, but with something wrong. A pair of children's shoes, dry on the outside but damp on the inside. A wristwatch still keeping time, thrown under the reception chair. A cell phone vibrating with no signal, the screen frozen at 2:33 in the morning. And most disturbing, the list of guests' names growing longer and longer. No one comes back to pick up what they left behind. No one complains about the charge on their card. No one calls to ask if they left anything behind. Have you ever been there? Feeling like the world kept spinning, but you were stuck in some time warp? Because that's how I felt, as if the motel existed in a gap between realities, as if guests entered and were whisked away to someplace I couldn't reach. But I swear, I tried to understand. I tried to talk to the manager. I tried to review the security cameras. I tried to leave early and follow a guest, but the furthest I got was the door to room 16. Locked. Always locked. And every night, the same thing. I welcome another guest, register their name, hand over the key, and never see them again. Now I want to tell you what happened that winter morning, when a stranger checked me in without saying a word, and left something on the counter that made me doubt whether I was truly awake. Because that's when everything began to unravel. I know it may sound crazy, and at this point, you might be thinking there's a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe a system error, a sloppy manager, or guests leaving through the back door unannounced. But what if I told you I've already checked every single one of these possibilities? That I've reviewed cameras, reports, and even tried staying awake during the day, observing activity. Nothing. No answers. Just silence. And the constant feeling that I'm being watched. And that's why I need to share this with someone, because the more I keep these stories to myself, the more they seem to take shape, as if they want to swallow me. If this kind of story moves you, if it gives you a twinge of distrust or even an involuntary shiver, comment below. Tell me what touched you most, what would make you doubt your own reality. Sometimes just writing it down helps us organize our feelings, right? And if you enjoyed this style of story, with its denser, more realistic, and layered feel, leave a like here. It looks like just a button, but that's what makes this content reach more people. People who may also have felt like they were in places that weren't quite of this world. Oh, and if you want to keep following this kind of story, always with that mix of mystery, psychological suspense, and that heavy atmosphere of places that seem to not exist on maps, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep these stories alive, bring new stories, and maybe, who knows, understand what's really happening in these forgotten places along the road. Now, Let me tell you what came next, because what was about to happen that morning is something that still keeps me up at night. There's something about the early morning that changes the way you perceive the world. Things lose the weight of everyday life and begin to breathe on their own. It was during this shift between midnight and 6 that I came to know the true face of that motel, a face that never smiles. My routine at first was almost monotonous. I'd arrive around 11:40 p.m., coffee in hand, cross the half-dark lobby and sit behind the reception desk. The old AM radio sometimes worked, sometimes not. The neon vacancy sign creaked at the top of the building as if complaining about its own existence. It would flash red, then go out. It would come back on, then disappear. A nervous, illogical rhythm. From my perch, I could see everything. The highway entrance, the parking lot, the row of room doors, the ice machine next to the stairs. But what I stared at most was the wall clock. It didn't seem to move, especially between 2 and 4 in the morning. No one came in, no one went out, and I stood there, watching the hands drag by, as if time were afraid to cross that stretch of Route 66. For the first week, I took note of every guest who arrived. I checked their ID, handed over the key, and wrote down their room number. Most were just passing through, exhausted truck drivers, discreet couples, lonely travelers with haggard faces. Some didn't even exchange a word. They handed over their card or cash, took the key, and disappeared into the early morning mist. But as the days passed, I noticed something curious. The entries piled up in the notebook, but I didn't see anyone leaving. The same parking spaces remained occupied for days. The cars seemed untouched. No traces of dust, no signs of having left. And the faces, well, I couldn't see the faces anymore. The strangest thing was that when I walked down the halls to check the locks or pick up towels, I heard nothing. No TV on, no shower running, no murmur coming from the rooms. It was as if everyone had been asleep the whole time, or worse, as if they'd left only their bodies there. The motel itself wasn't particularly old, but it had a forgotten air. The dark carpet smelled musty even when clean. The lights took seconds to come on. The cicadas outside were constantly chirping, and inside, the silence was broken only by two sounds: the ticking of the clock and the buzzing of the neon signs. Every now and then, a new guest would show up, someone who arrived late, dusty, and looking lost. They always asked the same question: "Are there any vacancies?" And I always said yes. But when I returned the next morning for the day shift, I saw the same names on the register. Just the names, never the faces. There was one room in particular, room 16, that was never occupied. There was a sign on the door that said maintenance, but no one touched it, not even the manager. One day I asked, and he just shook his head, looking away. That stuck with me, like a stain impossible to clean. Deep down, I began to wonder if that motel actually functioned as a transit point, or if it was a full stop. I made my nightly rounds, trying to avoid certain hallways. I even saw lights on in rooms that were supposedly empty. And worst of all, I heard footsteps behind me in hallways no one had entered. There was one night, I think it was Wednesday or maybe Thursday, that's when the days start to blur together, when I left the counter and went to the back bathroom. When I came back, there was a key on the counter, room 11, but I hadn't seen anyone that night. I looked at the camera monitor, black screen, all 5 at once. When they came back, the hallway was empty, but the door to room 11 was open. I don't know if it was fatigue or something deeper, but a kind of torpor took over my mind. I began to take more notes than I should have. I asked guests questions, even without expecting an answer. I wrote down the make and model of their cars, the times the lights were on, the sounds I heard through the pipes. And one thing kept recurring. Even in occupied rooms, the shower was never turned on, the bed sheets were always folded, the wastebasket empty. It was as if those people didn't live there. They just were, frozen in a state between being and not being. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Subject: because it was precisely when trying to understand what was wrong that I began to notice the real signs. Comment there. There's something strange about this silence. The first car that caught my eye was a Dodge Grand Caravan. Dark blue, dusty, with a Little League sticker on the rear window. It showed up around 2:27 a.m. on a Friday. I entered the guest's name in the registry, Don Miller, room 14, and handed over the key. The man didn't say much. He wore thick glasses. His hands were shaking, and he looked around as if trying to memorize his surroundings. He went into the room. I returned to my post. Only 3 days later, the car was still there, and no one had checked out. The following Wednesday, another car arrived. A silver Civic, too shiny for the place. A young woman with short hair and an olive green coat got out. She smiled, said she was tired and wanted a night's rest. I filled out the notebook. Room 7. The car stayed in the same place for 6 nights. Then it disappeared. But there was no return of the key, no extra payment, not a single thank you. She simply didn't come by the front desk. At first I didn't notice the pattern. The routine was numbing. The early morning hours blind us to the subtle. But when you start paying attention, and I did, certain things jump out at you. There were too many cars in the yard and not enough faces in the hallways. The total didn't add up. If we had 14 rooms available and 10 cars in the yard, why did I never see more than 2 people walking around? I began checking the records more closely. I noticed that the names were piling up, with no checked out marked on any page. Some had been there for weeks, and the most disconcerting thing was that even when a car disappeared from the parking lot, the corresponding room key remained on the notice board, untouched. I started jotting down in a separate notebook the exact time each guest arrived, the make and model of the car, any details that would help me remember later. At first, it seemed like an exaggeration, paranoia even, but after I noticed the same cars were there day after day, with no one opening or closing the door, no noise from starting, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. One night, I left my desk and went out to the patio. I looked out the windows. The curtains were always drawn, but the light beneath the doors let out a yellowish glow. I listened for voices, a television on, any sign of a living presence. Nothing, just silence. A silence so profound it felt as if time had stopped inside. Back at the front desk, I reviewed the security camera tapes, the ones the manager had been relentless in not updating since 2009. And there, in black and white, I could see the footage. Guests checking in, walking to their rooms, unlocking the doors, and never leaving. No return footage. No guests heading back to the lobby. No key handover. Nothing. I called the manager one night. I asked if he'd ever noticed how many cars didn't crash with guests visible. He laughed, a dry laugh, as if I were questioning something too obvious to be taken seriously. "You think too much, kid. Just keep the doors open and the coffee hot." But that sentence only reinforced the discomfort, because thinking too much can be bad, but thinking too little in that place could be fatal. I began to distrust everything. The motel's structure, the mirrors in the hallways, the phone that always went busy after 3 a.m., even the air I breathed. Inside, it was heavy, full of invisible particles, as if it carried unspoken secret stories frozen in time. And speaking of time, that's when something even stranger struck me. Some of the clocks in the rooms always showed the same time, 3:06, even after changing the batteries, even after being manually set. No matter how many times we adjusted them, after a late night in the room, they would always reset themselves to that time. I started wondering, what if the people who come in here don't leave the way we think? What if somehow this place absorbs, freezes, transforms? I remember an elderly lady who came in one Sunday night. She was carrying a small purse, a picture frame under her arm. She asked for a room on the ground floor to avoid stairs. I filled out the registration form and handed over the key. The next morning, I went to check on her. The room was locked, but under the door, someone had left a folded note in fragile handwriting. "Don't look for me." Days later, her car was still there, and inside the window, the picture frame was gone. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it was the forgotten objects, the ones that remained even when the cars disappeared, that revealed the hidden truth behind that place. Right there, I'm on this journey too. I don't remember exactly when I started noticing the objects. Maybe because in the beginning we always try to rationalize them. We attribute them to someone's carelessness, to haste, to the common mess of those who pass by roadside motels with no intention of putting down roots. But over time, the pattern began to overwhelm me. The first week, it was a toothbrush, still damp, lying next to the sink in room 4. I was going to point it out to the guest, but I noticed his name was still listed as a guest. I went to check in person, and the room was empty. The bed was made, the towels were in place, but the toothbrush sat there, alone, as if someone had just used it and gone off to get ice. The next day, the same feeling. Room 7. A pair of children's sneakers left perfectly aligned in the entryway, as if the child had taken them off before jumping into bed. No record of guests with children that night, nor the night before, nor the night after. It was one of those models with blinking lights on the sole. And yes, they still blinked. I started keeping a notebook behind the counter. I wrote the room number, item description, date, and time. At first, it seemed like a silly, lost and found list, but the frequency of this made me uneasy. I started marking on the motel map which rooms had left items. Believe me, there was a sequence. It wasn't random. What bothered me most, however, was the condition in which these objects were found. Clothes still damp as if fresh from a body, wet towels on the bathroom floor, wristwatches still ticking, showing the same time the guest had checked in, and frozen in that time ever since, as if time for that object had been suspended. There was one digital clock in particular, left on the bed in room 10. It read 2:43. When I came back the next night to clean the room, it still read 2:43. The next day too, and the next. I changed the battery, just to be sure. Nothing changed. 2:43, forever. The smell in the rooms also changed. It was as if time had stopped inside them. It wasn't ordinary mildew. It was something denser, more organic. A presence. You know when you walk into a place and feel like you're not alone, even though there's no one else there? That was the feeling. As if the owners of those objects were still there, but could no longer be seen. In one specific instance, in room 3, I found a cup of still lukewarm coffee. The room's coffee maker hadn't even been used that night, according to the consumption log. But the cup was there, on the nightstand. Steam was still rising. And next to it, an open book, marking a page with a chapter title that, I confess, gave me chills. The day I was forgotten. That phrase kept resonating in my mind, because that was exactly what seemed to be happening. People were being forgotten inside that motel, not just by me, by the system, by the records, but by some force operating at the edges of our understanding, as if reality had holes, and that place was one of those holes. I began to dream about objects. I saw clothes moving on their own, as if they still enveloped invisible bodies. I heard the footsteps of children's sneakers running down the hallway. At night, once, I thought I saw a shadow in the window of room 8, but when I approached, there was only a hanger spinning slowly, without any wind. By this point, I could no longer maintain a healthy routine. My night shifts became solitary journeys of observation and fear. I began filming a few rooms with a small hidden camera, just to make sure I wasn't the one losing my sanity. And that's when I saw it. A 3-second recording before the battery died. A clock left on the floor, showing 1:13. And the shadow of a body passing by. No sound, no defined color, just a fluid silhouette crossing the hallway and disappearing into the wall. Did I show this to anyone? No. I didn't have the courage, because a part of me still tried to deny it, still tried to rationalize. Maybe I was tired, too impressed, influenced by the stories the guests themselves left behind. Because yes, I also found notes hidden inside drawers. One simply said, "If you're reading this, don't open the door when they knock." and the time stamped below was 3:17. The connections between the objects, the hours, and the rooms began to form a puzzle I no longer knew how to unravel. It was as if each abandoned object carried a part of whoever had been there, as if those people were still trapped in some space between what we call real time and some other dimension. The hidden truth of those nights began to creep into the details, and it completely changed my mindset. I stopped being a simple knight, receptionist, and began to see myself as the guardian of something much bigger than myself, like someone who witnesses a crack open and close every night, unsure of what it holds inside or what's keeping it from escaping. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just an impression. It wasn't just accumulated fatigue. This was becoming more than a pattern. It was as if time inside was doubling, repeating itself, undoing logic. I needed to get to the bottom of it. It was a Thursday night, I think. I say I think because back then it was already difficult to be certain of the days. The pages of my notebook were all scribbled at different times, the writing sometimes shaky, sometimes too firm, as if it weren't mine. I took the master key, something I avoided using due to internal policy, and decided to visit the rooms whose records were active, but no one had checked out. Room 5, the key still hung in the panel, but the system showed it had been occupied for 4 days. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again. Louder. Silence. I turned the key and entered. The room was clean, impeccably clean. The bed was made. The toilet paper was folded. Everything smelled of the artificial lavender the housekeeping service left behind. But there was no one there. No suitcases. No toothbrushes. Not even the wastebasket showed any signs of use. It was as if no one had been there, though the registry insisted they had. I went to room 11, same process, another absence, dim lighting, everything in order, but on the bedside table was an open pack of cigarettes with a still warm lighter. It was impossible for anyone to have left without me noticing. The front door leads directly to the reception, and I never slept on duty. Never. Besides, no cameras showed entry or exit. I continued from room to room, each one telling me something my eyes denied, but my body felt. In room 8, there was a half-empty glass of water, fresh condensation. In room 14, a pair of wet sneakers, mud still dripping onto the carpet, but no footprints beyond them. And in room 6, a child's handkerchief on the pillow, pink, smelling of talcum powder. I returned to reception feeling like I was carrying a secret I didn't even understand. The system showed all those occupied rooms, from different dates, but they always seemed to coincide with nights of denser fog, or when the full moon seemed larger than it should have been. I called the manager. He arrived as he always does, silently, opening the back door with a double key. A thin man with dull skin and sunken eyes. He always wore the same brown leather jacket, smelling of stale tobacco and mildew. I sat with him at the small table near the water cooler and opened the system. I showed him the dates, the rooms, the names of the guests who had checked in but never checked out. "Is this all right?" I asked directly. He looked at the screen, then at me. He ran his hand over his chin and cleared his throat. Finally he murmured, "It must be a system error. But the objects, the empty rooms, the hanging keys, are all of these also mistakes?" He sighed deeply and looked away. Then he said, "This is a place of passage. Not everyone passes through in the same way." I stared at him for a long second. That wasn't an answer. It was empty poetry, an excuse for someone trying to avoid the situation. But the way he said it, the tone of his voice, it seemed more like a warning than an attempt to calm things down. "Look, with all due respect," I began, trying to remain calm. "I've been here for years, and I've never seen anything like this. There's something wrong, and it's not with the system." He then stood up. He ran his hand over the shoulder of my jacket, looked out the window as if he saw something outside, and replied in a whisper, "You're still watching. That's more than most." He left through the back door as if he had evaporated into the mist. I was alone again, with the uneasy feeling of being manipulated, as if the truth had been there all along, just out of my reach. Something behind the scenes of the world was refusing me access. It was like being inside a play, where the script changes every night, but only I remain in the same role. I tried accessing the security cameras. I opened the file from the night before. Nothing. Black screen from 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. I tried opening the backup flash drive. Corrupted. I tried to check. The movement at the entrance. Everything was normal, but curiously there was no one crossing the front door, neither entering nor leaving. Little by little, I began to wonder, could it be that I've been here longer than I think? I reached for my watch. It was 3:44 a.m. A strange time, the same time as 2 days ago. I grabbed my phone. The date was March 13th. But wasn't it March 13th yesterday too? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it was in that moment, in that confusion of time and lack of answers, that reality began to lose its edges. I began to feel something watching me from some unseen point, a presence perhaps, or just the echo of my own doubts. The reception area, once my space of safety and routine, began to feel like a glass prison, and every sound coming from the hallway, a footstep, a door, a creak, seemed to come from another dimension. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to know if this strange feeling has also hit you at some point in your life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was precisely at this point that something inside me began to crumble. It was as if the reality around me had loosened the knots that held it together. The days began to blur together, not in a poetic or abstract way. I really couldn't tell if it was Monday or Thursday anymore. The watch on my wrist, which always gave me the security of a modicum of control over time, stopped. It simply stopped. I changed the battery. Nothing. I grabbed another one from the reception desk drawer. Also stopped. The digital display on the kitchen wall always stuck at 3:17. Sometimes it blinked, other times it went blank. Time seemed like a cruel joke, but that wasn't all. The nights began to last longer. It wasn't just an illusion. The sky darkened and then took a long time to lighten. I watched the sun set in orange hues behind the rusted "Sleep Easy" motel sign, and then silence, dense darkness. Long, and there I sat, waiting for dawn. Sometimes it felt like I dozed for hours, but when I opened my eyes, the wall clock still read 2:46. Other times I blinked, and it seemed 3 days had passed. My beard grew, but the calendar taped to the back of the reception desk still showed the same day of the month. The phone rang, but always with the same muffled sound. When I answered, silence, not even a breath. I began to wonder if time had stopped for everyone, or just me. You know that moment when your mind starts to ask dangerous questions. It was then that I began to realize that maybe I wasn't just surrounded by disappearing guests. Maybe I was dissolving too. Each hour inside that motel felt heavier. Sounds grew distant. The radio, an old station playing instrumental jazz, began to repeat the same tracks on a loop. Always the same notes, like a scratched record that no one removes from the turntable. The walls of the reception area seemed closer. I swear I felt the building's structure shrinking, as if the physical space were molding itself to my sanity. The fluorescent light above my head flickered with irritating frequency. I began counting the flashes between one oscillation and the next. Some nights I swore the light was on continuously. Other nights, it seemed to vibrate too quickly to count. And the mirrors, God, the mirrors. I avoided looking at them. There was a moment when I walked through the back hallway, the one that leads to the employee bathroom, and the corner mirror reflected my image with a split-second delay. But I saw it. I swear on everything I saw. I turned my head, and the reflection took a while to catch up, and it didn't look exactly like me. It was paler, more exhausted, older. That's when the question hit. Am I trapped here too? Could it be that the moment I took this job, I connected to something I can no longer let go of? Maybe all guests are like me, travelers, people displaced by life who found shelter for a night and stayed, forgetting, getting lost. And maybe I've become part of this cycle, part of the system. People call me the receptionist, but maybe I'm just another guest who never checked out. And it's strange, because the more this doubt gnawed at me, the more time stopped mattering. I started seeing figures, not exactly ghosts, but traces, echoes of presence. I saw a lady in a floral dress leave room 3 with a suitcase. I went to the door. It was locked. The room had been checking in for 2 weeks. No checkout, no call. And inside, empty. I heard children's laughter from room 6. When I entered, there was a pair of small sneakers, side by side, neatly lined up under the bed. Clothes were folded on the armchair. Someone had been there, or was they still there? That's when I started dreaming about the motel, lucid dreams, repetitive. In every one of them, I tried to leave. I'd grab my backpack, open the reception door, walk down the road, but end up back at the parking lot entrance, as if the roads were doubling, back on themselves, as if Route 66 had been sewn into a closed circle, and the motel was both the point of origin and destination. Voices began calling my name, whispers. On the radio, between static and saxophone notes, I heard, "Have you left yet? Are you still there? Are you awake?" And I answered, in the dark, alone. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. That night was particularly quiet, but not an ordinary natural silence. It was as if all sound had been absorbed by the motel. Walls, as if the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only that long, damp hallway, dimly lit by the yellowish lamps that hummed at irregular intervals. I no longer knew if it was Wednesday or Sunday, if days or just hours had passed since I last looked at the clock. I was tired, a tiredness that came not from the body, but from the soul, as if something was slowly draining my lucidity. It was in this state of confusion that I noticed something new, something I'd never noticed before, even though I'd crossed that hallway dozens of times. Room 16, it was there at the end of the west corridor, between the storage room and the disused laundry room. A number on the door, like any other, but there was something strange. I'd never seen it in use. It had never been reserved. No one had ever asked me to stay there. It was as if it didn't exist until that night. The light under the door was on, dim, flickering. Something in my chest tightened. It was an old childhood feeling, like when you wake up in the middle of the night and feel something in the dark watching you, even without seeing it. I approached slowly, my heart pounding faster than I cared to admit. There was no sound from inside, no movement, just that insistent light leaking through the cracks in the door, as if trying to escape something inside. In the reservation system, room 16 wasn't showing as available. In fact, it wasn't even on the motel map. I tried to convince myself it was just a mistake, an oversight by the previous manager. But something inside me knew otherwise. That exclusion wasn't accidental, it was intentional. The room existed, but at the same time, it didn't exist in the records, as if it were a blind spot, a space outside of logic, something reserved only for the unknown. That morning, when I confronted the manager, I received only a blank stare. He pretended not to understand what I was talking about. He said that all the rooms were undergoing maintenance in that wing. But when I persisted, mentioning the light on and the guest I'd seen entering, yes, I swear to God I saw someone enter there the night before, he fell silent. He muttered, barely audible, "You must have dreamed again." And he left. It broke me inside. Dreamed again? Since when had I been having dreams in there? Or rather, since when had he known? As if he'd seen this cycle before, as if I wasn't the first, or maybe not even the last. That's when I realized. Room 16 was more than a physical space. It was a landmark, a limit, a boundary between what can be understood and what can't. I tried to open the door that same night. I grabbed the master key ring, even though I knew it wouldn't work. With each key I tried, the handle felt colder. It wasn't just the metal. It was as if the very environment around me had become inhospitable. The air grew thicker, more humid. My breath grew shallow, and the sounds faded. Nothing but my heart, nothing but my fear. When I tried to force my way in, a physical sensation repelled me. It wasn't a visible force, but an instinctive impulse that made me recoil, like when your hand approaches a flame, and even before touching it, your body recoils out of pure survival instinct. But in this case, there was no heat. There was something colder than ice, something invisible, but present. I began to observe. Every night the light in room 16 remained on. It never flickered. It never went out. No one left. No one entered. Just that constant presence, as if time itself was suspended inside. I began to write things down. The nights, the hours. I tried to document them as a way to maintain my sanity. But the strange thing was that when I returned to my notebooks the next day, the notes were jumbled, dates repeated, letters that didn't seem to be mine. Sometimes entire words crossed out so hard they ripped the paper. And then, one morning, I heard it, from inside the room. 3 knocks, slow, spaced, as if the wood itself were alive, reverberating the sound. There was no one in the hallway. It was as if the door were slamming from the inside out. I froze. A knock. Silence. Another knock. The sound echoed strangely, as if it were coming not just from beyond the door, but also from within me. A third knock, and the hallway went dark, just for a second, but long enough to make me doubt my own existence. I returned to reception in a daze. I sat down, trembling. I looked at the security camera monitor, but room 16 wasn't there. On the screen, between rooms 15 and 17, just a black block, dead pixels, absolute silence, as if the technology itself refused to see. I turned off the cameras. I looked out the reception window and, in the distance, saw the room light on. And in that moment, for the first time, I wondered aloud, what if this is why no one ever leaves here? What if room 16 is the exit door, but not an ordinary exit? A definitive exit, a destination, a point of no return. Comment there. There's something beyond door 16. I returned to reception at the end of one of those shifts that I don't know if lasted 1 night or 3. My eyes burned, my body felt heavy, but something inside me wouldn't let me stop. My mind throbbed with jumbled images, stopped watches that still vibrated on my wrist, muffled voices from empty rooms, the damned light in room 16 that never went out. I needed to understand. I needed to get to the root of it all. And for the first time, I decided to rummage through the old books. Not the digital files, but the physical ones, the ones kept in a low cabinet behind the counter, locked with a lock so ancient it seemed to refuse to be opened again. I picked up the set of keys. I tested them one by one with the patience of a condemned man. And when the last one turned with a sharp click, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Inside, stacked unevenly, were the ledgers of records, thick notebooks covered in a fine layer of dust, with faded labels that indicated dates that went up to 1992, then stopped. The following years were unmarked, as if time had lost interest in recording itself. I picked up one of the larger volumes, one with a faux leather cover torn at the corner, and opened it. The pages were yellowed, some with damp spots, others torn or stuck together. But there were the names, so many names, in different handwriting, different inks, full names, license plates, documents, always accompanied by a room number, but no checkout dates, none. It was as if everyone had come in, signed, settled in, and never left. At first I thought it was carelessness, a filling error, but as I leafed through I began to see the pattern. The same hands that recorded the entries, month after month, never checked out. And the signatures were like echoes of the silence that hung over the place. I lingered on a specific name, Selena Martha Lopez, license plate, PhD 2298, room 6, check-in date, 2003. I'd never heard that name, I'd never seen that sign, but I knew room 6 had been under constant maintenance ever since I'd been there. And yet on the digital system, the same one I used every shift, there it was, active guest, almost like a digital whisper from a presence that never checked out. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. I started looking for this pattern in other names. Room 12, Room 3, and the dreaded Room 16. All had old, unfinished entries with the same silence upon departure. I spent hours writing down the names in a notebook, cross-referencing the dates, and something even stranger emerged. The intervals between entries were exactly 91 days, always the same cycle, as if on rotation, as if the motel had its own calendar, its own roulette wheel of victims. But what truly broke me was when I found my own name. Yes, there among the 2022 records was my full name in my handwriting with my ID number. Check-in, July 16th, 2022, room 4, and no checkouts recorded. The problem? I started working there in September. I'd never stayed as a guest. And even if I had, how would that book have my handwriting, my details? My heart raced. I dropped the notebook and staggered back. I leaned against the counter with trembling hands, trying to breathe. At that moment, the wall clock, which had been standing still for days, ticked once, just once, and then stopped again. I looked up. The hands were at 3:17, the same time as the ticking I'd heard days, or nights, before. The same time that appeared on one of the clocks in the queue hallway. The same time I'd seen flashing on the TV in room 6. There was a pattern, a secret structure that governed everything there, and now I was part of it. I ran to the computer. I logged in. I searched for Selena Martha Lopez's name. My record was active. I searched for other names, active, without exception. Everyone in the database was listed as present on site. I went to the lost and found cabinet, where we put items left behind by guests. And there they were, reading glasses with a very high prescription, wedding rings, a pacifier, a notebook with children's drawings, all labeled, all with names corresponding to the dead records. It was a memorial of absent presences. I went back to the books. Once again, I looked at my name and saw that someone had updated it by hand. Room 4, status permanent, written in red, in a handwriting I recognized as my own, but I didn't remember writing it. Or maybe I did. Maybe during one of those shifts when I no longer knew whether I was awake or dreaming. The impact was brutal, as if the curtain were finally falling, as if the motel were showing me what I'd refused to see for so long, that it wasn't a place of passage, but a point of convergence, a place where time doubled, where identities blurred, where presences accumulated like dust on abandoned shelves. The hidden truth was right there, but it was like looking into the depths of a mirror that doesn't reflect. It only swallows. And in that moment, I understood. I was no longer the receptionist. I was part of the furniture. Comment, I'm on this journey too. If you also felt that some part of you has been forgotten in a place where time doesn't pass, it just repeats. The digital clock in reception blinked 2:58. Another sleepless night. The wind outside hummed through the cracks in the automatic door, as if whispering uncontrollable whispers. I'd been standing for too long, maybe days, maybe weeks. My body was still responding, but my mind was beginning to drift between fragments of lucidity and a constant fog that prevented me from knowing if I'd already dreamed it all, or if it was still dreaming now. That's when I got up from the vinyl chair, the same one I occupied every night, facing the old entry system panel, and approached the glass door of the reception area. The light from the red sign outside flickered more intensely that early morning, casting intermittent reflections against the glass. Motel! It blinked like a blind, insistent warning, a code perhaps only I could understand now. And there, with my forehead almost touching the cold glass, I saw myself. Or I thought I saw myself. The image reflected wasn't mine, not exactly. The stubble was thicker than I remembered. The eyes were sunken, almost hollow, and the uniform, my light blue receptionist's shirt, didn't seem to fit the same body I felt. For For a second, I swear to everything honest in me, I couldn't recognize myself. It was at that moment that something inside me snapped. A silent crack in the certainty of who I was, of what I was doing there. The memory of my hiring, for example, vanished like steam. I remembered my first shift, or thought I did. But what about before that? Who hired me? Where was HR? Who gave me the keys to the reception desk that first night? None of it was clear. It was as if my story had begun right there, at that counter. As if I had been born in that chair, with my name embroidered on my name tag and a phone that never rang. With my face still pressed against the glass, I stared at the reflection and began to notice something even more disturbing. It didn't move quite like I did. My fingers trembled, but its grip was steady. Its head turned slightly to the left, but the image still stared straight ahead. This wasn't a simple mirror. It was a memory or a foretaste. It was a reflection of someone I might once have been or was about to become. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. As I stepped away from the glass, a thought hit me like a thermal shock. What if I, too, were among the names on those forgotten files in the old reception cabinet? What if my own registration was there, stamped with a check-in date, but no checkout date? My steps led me to the drawer where, days ago, or nights, I don't know, I'd found the old files. The folders were the same, yellowed, covered in dust, with handwritten letters from guests no one ever saw leave. My hands trembled as I pulled one of the last folders from the back. Daniel M., I read quietly, the name sounding all too familiar. Opening it, there was the file. Arrival date 3 years ago, license plate number of a car I thought I'd also seen there in the yard. But the departure field, blank, like all the others. And below, an additional handwritten field, transferred to reception, night shift. The ground beneath my feet seemed to give way for a moment. What do you mean, transferred to reception? I hadn't replaced anyone. There were no records of previous receptionists, but that file, that name, it was my name. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the last name, the license plate of the car I was driving before I got there, the ID number, everything, exactly as if someone had registered me there before I even knew it, as if that position had already been assigned to me before I even realized it existed. That's when everything started to unravel. The low voices I'd heard in the background began to take shape. They weren't delusions, not only. They were like echoes of other receptionists, other souls trapped in the same invisible machine that dragged me ever deeper. Each of them perhaps had gone through the same stages: doubt, denial, acceptance, until they forgot they'd once been free. I sat back down in the chair, the same one, the only one, and for a few seconds I stared at the blue screen of the system monitor. It flashed a word I'd never seen before, a hidden tab: status, active, reception, next to my name. It was all there, always. I just hadn't seen it. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Ever since I found that entry with my name on it at the bottom of the drawer, everything vague began to reorganize itself like pieces of a puzzle I never asked to put together. But even with this revelation eating away at me, something else insisted on keeping me there, as if leaving was no longer an option, as if a part of me had accepted, even unwillingly, that this would be my final address. That. A night, and I use the word night cautiously, because the hours here seemed to flow in their own way. Events didn't flow as they did on other days. The wind died down. The constant roar of the road fell into absolute silence, as if the world outside had been erased, and the sign's light, which had previously blinked pale red, now remained steady, shining with an almost aggressive intensity, as if it wanted to warn me of something or intimidate me. I sat back down in the reception chair. I no longer knew why, maybe out of habit, maybe because everything else didn't make sense. The system monitor, the one with the faded blue background, blinked slowly, but now displayed a new status line: guest checking in. The room number 16. Again. Only this time, something was different. I'd never seen the system register anyone entering that room. It had always been an exception, a kind of forbidden space, as if the motel itself knew there was something there that shouldn't be touched. The guest file was blank. No name, no number, no check-in time, but the room was registered as occupied, and the light on the panel indicated that the door had opened a few minutes ago. I stood up. An ancient instinct, perhaps the last vestige of who I was, pushed me forward. I walked down the narrow hallway, the same steps I'd taken dozens of times before. The sound of the carpet beneath my feet seemed thicker, muffled. The air in the hallway was dense, as if I were drifting into a viscous dream. I stopped. In front of door 16. The overhead light flickered slightly, but didn't go out. I glanced at the lock. For the first time, it was unlocked. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. The doorknob yielded to the touch. No creak, no distinctive sound, just the dull click of the mechanism giving way. The door opened slowly, revealing a dark room, devoid of furniture, no bed, nothing that resembled the other rooms, just an empty space, the floor covered in a thin, constant mist. And inside, time seemed suspended. There was no musty smell, nor the low hum of appliances. It was pure, absolute silence, the kind that hurts the ears. I entered cautiously, feeling the air grow colder. Not cold like a draft, but cold like absence, as if the warmth no longer existed in that place. My eyes took seconds to adjust, but there was nothing to see except the clock. Yes, on the floor, in the center of the room, a clock with its hands stopped. 2:33 a.m. I knelt before it, watching the frozen seconds. I touched the glass, and something inside me twisted. The watch wasn't just an object there. It was a marker, a reminder. It hadn't moved in 3 weeks, according to my instinct, but now it was there, perfect. No dust, no wear, as if someone or something had just placed it in that exact spot for me to find. And it was at that moment that I felt it. The door behind me closed firmly, not with a bang, but with the decisiveness of something that knows you won't leave. I turned with a start. The doorknob was gone. The wall was smooth, as if I'd never entered that way, and yet the room wasn't claustrophobic. It was vast, infinite perhaps, but trapped. It was then that I heard the sound. A metallic click coming from somewhere I couldn't quite place, and then the subtlest of sounds, footsteps, light, precise, circling around me, unhurried, as if whoever or whatever it was simply observing, as if all this had happened before, as if I were simply repeating a cycle I'd never been aware of. I closed my eyes, trying to take a deep breath, but the air there didn't fill my lungs like it used to. It felt old, as if it had been reused for centuries, as if I were breathing the same breath as everyone who had ever been there. And when I opened my eyes again, the clock had changed, 2:34. The pointer had moved. My first reaction was relief. It's working, I thought. But then I realized what it meant. That room wasn't frozen in time. It was just waiting. And now, it had started counting. The clock here at reception still reads 2:33 a.m. It hasn't moved in 3 weeks, but today someone checked in. Would you dare to work here for a night? Tell me in the comments what you would do, and write, "I'm on this journey too." And remember, if you're driving Route 66, keep your eyes open, and that's when it all made sense, or at least the part I can still understand today. Because there are things we can't explain logically, but we feel them. And when you feel them, you can no longer pretend you don't know. Some truths reveal themselves slowly, not to be understood all at once, but to settle within us like a silent presence. If you've made it this far, perhaps you've also felt this unexplainable restlessness, this feeling that certain stories aren't just stories. They're mirrors, crooked mirrors, but they reveal hidden truths that we avoid facing. So, if this content touched you in any way, if it gave you chills, a question, or even a moment of silence, leave your comment below. Write, "I'm with you until the end." Because knowing you've been here with me until now makes all the difference. Your likes also help, not because of the numbers, but because they show that there's a real connection between those who experience these stories and those who listen. This kind of content is made with sensitivity, dedication, and a certain kind of courage. And when you like it, it shows that it's worth continuing. If you'd like to follow me on this journey, there's a video here that complements this dive. Click and continue there. The story is even darker and may change the way you see ordinary places. After all, some doors, even when they seem closed, continue to open from the inside.